In this episode, we want to get personal. We want to talk about mortgages. We want to talk about mortgages as business owners, as entrepreneurs. And we have two different scenarios we're going to unpack here today, and they are actually our scenarios. Kyle's scenario with his mortgage is different than my mortgage scenario. It's likely could be similar to you. One of those could be similar to your mortgage scenario, or maybe you're in this position where you don't have a mortgage, and you're wondering what you could be doing alternatively. And that's actually, we're going to unpack that as well. So we're going to dive into mortgages and how to think about these really important things that are in our lives as business owners. So Kyle, let's get into it, because specifically, we are in two different situations, so let's just unpack one at a time. And let's start with yours, because I think yours is probably the more common situation. Is what we come into renewal time. It's like, hey, my mortgage is up for renewal. What do I do? How do I do it? Should I just roll with the punches? Do I shop around? Do I extend? Do I kind of double down on rates? Do I want to pay this thing off as fast as possible? Do I want to stretch it out? Let's talk about your situation and what your choices are. So give us the lowdown. You don't have to give us specifics on numbers, but just give us specifics about like renewal time and what some of the choices you made for your personal mortgage. And keep in mind, folks, Kyle and myself, we're business owners, so we have our corporations to think about. Like, these are things that you do need to take into account, because they can make choices different because you have optionality.
100%. And the hardest part here is, we always like to talk on the show about like really the math, right? Former math teachers, guys that want to play with the spreadsheets and really answer questions of like, what does the math say? But then there's the other side of like behaviorally, like how do these actions make us feel? And we know that from research, a lot of what we do and what drives us is actually emotional. So when we look at behavioral economics, the decisions we make oftentimes are different than what the math says we should do. But I think starting with the math is really important. And, we articulate on this show quite a bit, especially for our incorporated business owner friends, that it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be taking out a significant amount out of the corporation, paying a higher amount of tax personally in order to, say, aggressively pay down a primary home mortgage, right? So like that's something we've advocated on previous shows. However, there's scenarios where, sometimes paying down the mortgage might make sense. Now, in my case, we'll start there because I just went through a renewal. Coming out of the pandemic, and actually in the pandemic was renewal time for me in 2020. It was December 2020. I basically lucked out and got an amazing low fixed rate, only for 5 years, sadly. Like now, if I could go back, I probably would have more aggressively looked at like what the 10-year fixed rate was at that time.
Well, your all-time lows, right?
All-time lows, right? And thinking, man, are these lows going to last forever? And of course we don't know, but the reality is that historically chances are that we're going to see rates going up, and they did go up. So I just went through this renewal, and unfortunately, as you look at the rates, and if you only look at the rates, you're probably going, shoot, I now want to aggressively pay this thing off, because now fixed rates are more around 4%. As we're recording this, variable rates, you can get them in the prime minus, zero point 0.4 to, I was lucky and got closer to 0.7, I believe, 7 or 7.5, something like that. And I went with the variable rate on this particular renewal. But what's really important for us to kind of recognize is, do we just renew and move on? Or is there any other moves that we could make? Now, if you've listened to some of the early episodes of the podcast, you'll know that we had a heavier weighting in real estate over our lifetime. And as former teachers, we had pensions. So we had pensions alongside, and therefore we were scaling into quite a bit of real estate. So we never really focused a whole lot on the tax-free savings account, because we were taking a lot of our money and putting it right into real estate assets. Whereas now, things have shifted for us over the last handful of years. Now with our operating businesses, now that we pay ourselves out of our operating companies, it kind of puts us in a tougher spot when we look to start putting money into something like a tax-free savings account, that I actually opted to take a little extra at renewal time to refinance and maximize the use of any additional space we had available in our tax-free savings accounts for myself and my spouse. My spouse is also a teacher, so she's contributing to a pension. And any of those additional funds, now that we've been sort of trying to diversify away, now I don't want to say away from real estate, but really just trying to increase our public market exposure up towards what we have going on in the equity and real estate, it's a really important move for us. So what we had actually done is we've actually done a refinance, taken some of that money, put it into the tax-free savings accounts. Now, some people would say, well, now you're paying interest in order to put some of that money into the tax-free savings account. However, as business owners would know, if I was to take an extra 50 grand out of my corporation in order to put into tax-free savings accounts, or even 25,000 or whatever that number is, I'm going to be taxed at a heavier personal tax rate in order to get those dollars in. So I'd much rather lean on some equity slowly. I don't want to say slowly because we're going to take that big chunk, put it directly into the tax-free savings account, and then get it invested in the different assets that we're looking to invest in the private or in the public market, I should say, as we go. And we'll hack away at that mortgage, which I've also extended it to a 30-year amortization.
Okay, tell me about that. Like, why extend it to a 30-year mortgage? Because it's like, I think it goes against what most people would think. It's like, well, I know I don't necessarily want to pay this off, but do I really want to stretch it for another 30 years here? Because like mentally, when you think about the behavioral part versus the math part, because obviously the math part says the payment will be lower, but the behavior part says more years of mortgage.
Yeah, totally. And you're absolutely right. And I'll be honest and say, like, doing it, even though mathematically I look at it and say, well, if let's say every additional dollar I take out of my corporation is going to get taxed at 40-ish%, 50-ish%, depending on how much we're pulling out, those dollars, I'm left with 50 or 60 cents in order to put into the tax-free savings account or to aggressively pay down my mortgage. So that's kind of like not a great position to be in. So why I stretch it out to 30 years is it gives me a little bit more optionality. We talk about optionality on the show all the time. My plan isn't necessarily to stretch it out for 30 years, but I do know that my minimum payment that I have, that I'm required to pay, is now going to be lower because it's a 30-year amortization. But I still have the opportunity to pay extra dollars if it makes sense, if the budget makes sense at the personal level, in order to open up additional equity in my home that I could then potentially put into other investments, be it into a non-registered account, be it into private investments, or be it into additional real estate opportunities that might present themselves down the road. So I want to keep that payment as low as possible. However, in my mind, I have a budget set, and you'll be proud of me there, John, because, I'm budgeting here. I have a budget set that I'm planning to actually make larger payments in order to increase the equity available on my home equity line of credit. This is a readvanceable mortgage. So as I put $1 of extra principal down, I'll get an extra $1 of equity in the HELOC. And my plan is for any extra dollars that I put on this mortgage, I'm going to then reborrow Smith maneuver style in order to invest in non-registered investments. So again, not necessarily going to say it's going to be into this ETF or that ETF, but it's not going to go into my RSP. It's not going to go into my tax-free savings account. It'll go into taxable accounts so that I then can write off that extra dollar of interest. I shouldn't say dollar of interest, the interest that's generated or that I have to pay on that dollar that I'm going to reborrow from equity.
Yeah. So what made you, what's the motivation here?
Yeah, like honestly, it's a great question. I think there's two things that always motivate me. One is I like optimizing, and I do want to maximize my investments across various asset classes, right? So we've got real estate down. We feel good about the real estate. We've got more money in the public markets than we've ever had before. So we're continuing to do that. We're doing it with various strategies, equity and income strategies that we play with. And we also have our permanent insurance, which essentially lives inside of our holding companies. So we've got a variety of assets going on. We have some plans to do more private investments over this next year. But ultimately for me, I'm looking at this and saying, I have this home, I have assets, and I have cash flow in various places. Again, a lot of our cash flow is inside the corporation, so it's not directly accessible. But at a personal level, when we're able to reinvest some of the equity that's locked up in our home, we put ourselves in a unique position where our home actually has a greater rate of return when we have a larger borrowed amount against it, because we have less of our own dollars in there growing at whatever that rate of return is on that primary residence. It also allows us to benefit from the long-term asset growth inside different accounts. So again, from the refi, putting it into the tax-free savings account, that's going to grow tax-free. I can pull it back at any time, which the goal is not to pull it back. But there is a behavioral challenge there, right? When you see a large mortgage amount or a large HELOC amount sitting there, it's really difficult unless you see right next to it what the balance is of all of these other investments to make you feel like things are going to be okay. So whether you do that in a spreadsheet, whether it's like all in the same bank where you can see, your checking, your savings, your investments, and your mortgage, that might make you feel a little bit better. But ultimately, at the end of the day, that's usually the biggest challenge that we have to overcome is the behavioral, sort of want for us to pay that mortgage down and just not owe anything. So again, it doesn't make you right. It doesn't make you wrong if you choose to pay down that mortgage completely. For us, we just look for ways that we can do some optimizing, but we also want to be obviously cautious in the types of investments we're making so that a big drawdown in the public markets, for example, doesn't have us wake up one day and make a bonehead move and, pull everything out.
Right. No, that move that the tip that you just gave to think about, extending your mortgage or doing what you did is taking more, like you took more from the lender than you needed to refinance or to renew. You refinanced and took more so that now it looks like you have an even larger loan like that. You're right. That mentality of going, oh my gosh, like a bigger loan hurts, but then having a system or, your net worth statement staring at you in the face every month can be super helpful to go like, am I going in the right direction?
Right.
Because even though you made that move, you've got these other things that you're comparing against to say like, actually this month I'm higher than I was before because I made this move. And that is an important, motivator to keep you paying down the mortgage at the normal rate, but also, taking that doubling up that investment or making that larger payment on the mortgage and then investing the difference there. Like that will show you month to month to month that you made the right move and that you're continually growing your net worth and your bottom line. So like that tip, and I think that's a great tip for us to kind of take forward.
Yeah, and I think like something just to kind of like leave people with, especially our incorporated business owner friends, like if let's say you had room in your tax-free savings accounts. I'm just going to use $100,000 as the example. We're using numbers just to help you try to grapple with some of these decisions. If you have $100,000 of room in that tax-free savings account and say your mortgage is up for renewal, okay, or you're close to renewal time, or maybe even you have a HELOC available with 100,000 available. I have two options if your plan is to fill the tax-free savings account. Now, the reality is the tax-free savings account is one of the, I would say, greatest gifts we have aside from the primary residence not having any capital gains tax on it. That's a great gift. But the second one is the tax-free savings account. Even if you're in your mind going like, I don't really like the public markets, or I want to be in real estate, or I want to, do something else. I want to be in private markets, whatever it might be. That bucket is such a great bucket. And, to have room available, if there's any way that I can fill it up, but doing it in a logical way, is the greatest way you can do it. So for example, as a business owner, if I was to pull money out of my business in order to put 100 grand into a tax-free savings account, for example, if you take it out as a salary, and let's say you've already got a salary that's significant enough, and now you're taking an extra 100 grand as a bonus, for example, you're going to pay 50% on those dollars that come out. So you're going to need 200,000 from your corporation to come out, because 100,000 of it is going to get eaten up in tax in order to fill that bucket. So you're now down $1,000 from your world, your assets.
Okay.
Whereas if I pull 100,000 from my home, I'm literally just pulling the 100, and then I have to essentially deal with the interest. Let's pretend it's five. I have to pay $5,000 in the first year on interest. But remember, that number gets lower and lower if we slowly knock it down. You could be more aggressive with it or less aggressive. If you're too aggressive with knocking that $100,000 down, then you're still going to be paying a lot or a significant amount in taxes from your corporation. So finding a balance that works for you is going to be really important to do. Now, some of you are going to say, you know what, Kyle, if I'm taking the 100, I'm going to take it as a dividend so that I'm going to probably cap out at somewhere around 39, 40%. Right. Okay, the math's still the same, right? Same idea. We got to take a lot of money out in order to fill up that tax-free bucket. So as a incorporated business owner, if there's ways that you can be a little bit more strategic, that will definitely help you along. Now, for me, I needed that extra plan. So the extra plan for me is that I added it to my primary mortgage. I can't deduct any interest off of my taxes for this extra balance. So in my mind, any additional cash flow that we have in our world, I'm going to put on the primary mortgage, in my mind, pretending like I'm funneling or fueling my tax-free savings account, because I've already done it. I already borrowed the money. I'm just kind of paying my tax-free savings account bucket back in order to do so. But at the same time, I'm going to re-borrow those dollars and put it into a non-registered account. So that's my plan for this particular scenario. And again, it wasn't 100,000. We used some example numbers here. Okay. So, don't hold us to the numbers. We're just trying to give you a sense of what that might look like and sound like for you. We just want to deter people from getting too aggressive, taking too much out of the corporation at any one time, whether it's to pay down the mortgage or whether it's to fill up the tax-free savings account. We still want you to get that bucket full, but let's get creative on how we do it. Now, as an aside, the tax or the RRSP, if you take a salary and you take 100 grand out as a salary, even though you're going to lose half of that amount, remember, if you dump 100 grand into the RRSP, you're going to get all that money back. Okay. So there's ways where it can make sense for the RRSP to take additional dollars out of the corporation because you're going to get that back. But keep in mind, you want to be more strategic about it and decide whether dumping all of that money into the RSP is the right move. We call that, a little bit of a higher security prison than the low security prison that is your corporation. So really just finding a strategic way in order to play with those buckets is going to be a really important move. And then most importantly, deciding on your goals down the road and making sure you're comfortable with it behaviorally is going to be the ultimate, most important move, because if you can't stomach it, then obviously you're going to do nothing, and nothing isn't going to help you get to where you want to get to.
All right. So let's talk about my scenario, because I think in a way, you've given some tips that I think are helpful for my scenario already. So we can just maybe touch on those specifically. But in my scenario, I'm at a point where, you think about background, like Kyle and I have the same corporate structure. We have all the same pieces at our disposal. However, I'm in a position where tomorrow, if I wanted, waiving the fees, I could pay my mortgage off. Because we pay ourselves a little bit more from our corporation and salary, so we can take advantage of our RSP contributions and kind of fill that bucket up, like what Kyle was saying. I could decide, what, I don't want to pay myself the RSP. I just want to pay the mortgage off because, like, mentally that might make sense to me. Like, it just feels right. So I'm in a situation where my mortgage is very low, and coming into I'm in the middle of my term. So it's like I've got a couple years left on my term. I have a variable mortgage, a rate right now. And so we're going to turn to Kyle and Kyle to help, like, what in this scenario, if I'm not at refinance time, I have not yet refinanced, or I'm going to come into refinance time. What are some of my options, knowing that I could go mortgage free? Because, like, some part of your brain, you got like the devil on your shoulder and you got the angel on your shoulder, and it's like one of those people is saying, like, pay the mortgage off.
Yeah,
you know, that's like, it's like mentally, you know, you've got that snowball effect. I was thinking like Dave Ramsey's snowball effect, where it's like, pay off these things to generate habit for doing other things. And that can pay off down the road, because in reality, there's no wrong answer here. Like, we could pay the mortgage off, and then now that frees up the amount of money that I was dedicating to the mortgage each month to do more. Like, I could put that in my tax-free savings account every single month. I can build that way, right? Or I could then start borrowing more from the line of credit to do the same thing you just said about filling that tax-free savings account up. So there's like that option. But the other option is, like, come renewal time, I could extend like you have. But you're taking a small amount of loan and extending it for a longer period of time. In your opinion, your guidance here, what's some moves that I should make?
Yeah, like, I would say it really all comes down to how optimized you want to be. So it's like this constant push and pull between the math and between like how do you want to feel, and how do you feel in terms of your own wealth journey. Now, you and I, we had a conversation over the weekend where, you know, you were sort of stating that, like, you could pretty much put it in cruise control and you should be able to be at your financial freedom number, you know, over the next handful of years, like with, and we'll say with room, you know, meaning like you're not like concerned. So the real question then becomes is like, is it worth it to you? You know, and I think that's like one of the biggest things that only you as the individual can answer. And this is for everyone who's listening and everyone who reaches out to us. You know, a lot of people like come and they're asking like for us to give them the answer. And in reality, they have to come up with their own answer. Like, I am an optimizer. Like, it motivates me. Like, I'm always intrigued. I'm always curious, but I'm also emotional. So like, a lot of times, like, I have these big goals to optimize doing this, this, and this. But then sometimes, you know, to get that process down, to make it like a structure so that I don't have to think about it and just make it happen and know it's going to do what I want it to do. That's the hard part here. And I would argue for someone like you, Jon, you might choose to go, you know what? You've got a line of credit. You've got a significant amount of equity in your home. You could take a chunk of that equity and fill up or top up the tax-free savings accounts appropriately, and then slowly pay back that HELOC amount. You could literally go the other angle and go, I'm ready to just like completely make this mortgage gone, and I'm comfortable with the assets that I have. Am I optimizing? Like, am I going to be the greatest, you know, investor version of Jon? The answer is, well, no, not comparatively. But the real question, I think, comes down to like, how does it make you feel? And like, if you get like this dopamine hit when you pay off that mortgage. And again, I would always argue for people, whether they want to have a balance or not on their home, it's like, have the equity there so that if you do need it, do want it, do have an opportunity, you can use that as your opportunity bucket, right? So for a lot of people at a personal level, their home equity line of credit is their wealth reservoir. And that's not a bad move. Like, we can't argue with you about that. So I would say for someone like yourself, giving yourself some time to think. The beauty is that you've got a couple of years between now and your refinance date. Maybe you do want to pull a little bit extra to fill up those tax-free savings buckets, or to do maybe some renovations in the home or whatever it might be. And then you might want to apply a more aggressive pay down strategy with a reborrowing for any additional dollars that you were going to put into the market. So for me, the way I look at it is I go, you know, if I'm going to take $1 and it's going to go into an investment, and we're talking at a personal level here today, right? So today we've been talking all about the personal level. If that $1 going to go into investments anyway, I'm going to try to think of a way that I can make it more tax efficient. So that's where I'm going to pay down my non-tax deductible mortgage interest, which is what I'm doing now. I know there's no benefit if I put every dollar I put in the tax-free savings account, there's no tax benefit there, which is why I borrowed the big chunk, chucked it there. I know that over a year's time, I should be able to get a better return regardless of what I'm invested in inside the tax-free savings account. So the arbitrage between what I'm paying in interest on my primary mortgage, I should be able to beat that. And that's where some people might like feel more comfortable with borrowed funds going into something that has more predictable income coming in. So for example, like an equity fund that is high income, even though it may not do what the S&P 500 does, it at least has like monthly income coming in. So you can see that, hey, my interest was, I don't know, I'll just make up a number, $200 a month on that borrowed amount. And I made $400. So now you're going like, I feel good about that. And that helps you sleep at night. That's probably better to get a 9% return where you see the cash flow going in, then maybe the market's up, maybe the market's down and there's no cash flow and you're always wondering whether you did the right thing. So there's all kinds of ways that you can do it. But I would say for someone like yourself, if you're eager to top up the tax-free savings, I would just reborrow on a HELOC, make sure it's not mixed in with any borrowed funds, that you've been using for Smith Maneuver, for any real estate purchases you made, anything in non-registered accounts. Make sure it's on a separate segment and you could borrow that chunk, chuck it into the tax-free savings account and slowly hack away at it. Or you just choose to go, you know what? Keep paying down the mortgage as is for now. I've got a couple years till renewal time. Slowly feed any additional capital into the tax-free savings bucket. And come renewal time, kind of plan for yourself on what's my game plan. Do I want to reborrow against my home or am I comfortable with where I'm at? And again, you're not right. You're not wrong. It's just more or less, what are your goals? And does sleeping at night, is that one of my goals that I want? I just want to sleep a little bit better at night so that if and when the market drops, it just doesn't matter to me all that much.
Awesome tips there. And we want to know what your thoughts are. Everyone's got thoughts on where they are and what they stand. If you've got any recommendations, hit us up on all social media channels. We are Canadian Wealth Secrets. Actually, on Instagram, we're Invested Teacher. So look us up on our social media and fire us a comment on this topic, this episode. We'd be love to engage in the DMs over there. Just as a reminder, the content you heard here today is for informational purposes only. It's not construed as legal, financial, or other advice. One more reminder, Kyle Pierce is a licensed life and accident and sickness insurance agent and the president of corporate wealth management here at Canadian Wealth Secrets.